You'll know when you have a wild woman. She'll practice her craft without boundaries. She is truly autonomous. Her loyalty is only to the family she serves. She will not allow herself to be held back by a system she didn't create.
This podcast is for the birth keepers who want to grow and change, who are open to learning through self-reflection and supportive community. We are creating a space to explore without judgment. We are remembering we were born wild. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Born Wild podcast. I'm your host, Sophia Henderson. And today I have with me Sarah Thompson, who I'm very excited to have on. Thanks for coming on, and please introduce yourself.
My name is Sarah Thompson, and I am the author of 2 books that introduce the idea of functional medicine in maternity care. The first book was Functional Maternity, using functional medicine and nutrition to improve pregnancy and childbirth outcomes. And then the second book is a textbook for practitioners and particularly midwives called Beyond Results. And it's a practitioner's guide to functional lab analysis, specifically in pregnancy. I have a clinic, Sacred Vessel, which is a functional maternity-based clinic.
Where is your clinic?
My clinic is located in Fort Collins, Colorado. We do obviously local support, but I have expanded through the virtual realm. It's the beauty of technology, I think. And I do see clients and consult with clients all over the country.
Awesome. Love it. Well, take us way back where you feel your journey began. Like, how did you end up doing the work you do today?
Base education was in nutrition. So for me, nutrition has always been the foundation of health. And before I even started shifting my practice towards the maternity care side, I used nutrition, again, as that foundation for care. I have my medical degree is in traditional Chinese medicine. And to me, that resonated so much because the whole idea of traditional Chinese medicine was finding the root cause and using differential diagnosis to create these very detailed and specific patterns that created a more comprehensive, individualized approach to care. So that was just where I gravitated to in my journey of learning. When I started my practice, I worked primarily with sports medicine, pain management. I always joke it's like an acupuncturist or a TCM practitioner's bread and butter, right? We can almost guarantee we'll make a difference with pain management. But with all of my patient care, I always used nutrition. And it wasn't until I got pregnant myself that I was like, wait a second, nobody told me this whole pregnancy thing was so cool. Why didn't anybody tell me this was so cool? And I also got slightly disheartened as I went through my own maternity care journey because I, being somebody who really thinks nutrition is that base of everything in our bodies, as I asked my providers questions in regards to nutrition, the answers that I got were pretty simplified. It's as simple as, well, as long as you're taking a prenatal with folic acid and you avoid lunch meat, you're fine. I'm like, I feel like there's more, just a little bit more. So I started doing my own research, my own continuing education, and was just blown away by the amount of available information. And I started using that on my own patients, got amazing results, and decided that maternity care was the niche that needed the support. And I shifted my practice about 17, 18 years ago now to doing nothing but reproductive care. I always joke that traditional Chinese medicine was functional medicine before functional medicine was cool. Functional medicine, to me, it takes Western physiology and applies it to the same ideas, I feel like, as TCM, with this idea that, if you have a single diagnosis, let's say migraines, well, there may be 20 different variations of what's causing those migraines. And the goal of the practitioner is to use their big critical thinking brains to understand which, it's like one of those little flow charts. Do you have this? Yes. Do you have this? No. And you kind of go all the way down until you can't differentiate that pattern anymore. And that is the root cause. So what functional medicine aims to do is to do that, right? To understand what is the quote unquote root cause. And I always hate that definition, root cause medicine, but that's the kind of working term. But the idea is, how do all of these different things factor into that diagnosis and that physiological change that we're seeing in the body? Whether it's nutritional, lifestyle, maybe it's your sleep patterns, stress levels, how does the whole picture work? What does the whole person look like? So functional medicine becomes that true, just like whole person body medicine. mind, body, spirit medicine, just with the Western tone to it versus what I think the alternative medicine world has been saying for a very long time. So
Right.
again, it's the idea of bridging that gap,
Mhm.
bringing it all together and finding that root cause of a specific condition.
Okay. So you, when you were pregnant, if you were working with yourself, what would you
Yeah.
have wanted someone to say to you?
So I treat my clients the way I wish somebody had treated me, right? I am somebody who loves to know the why, hence why I do what I do is I had to go, well, why does that happen? Well, why does that happen? And I'm sure if you ask my parents, I was that little toddler in the back going, why? I gotta know all the reasons. And so I treat my clients like that because I truly believed in the idea of informed consent. And I believe that informed consent is understanding partly the physiology behind it. So if I tell somebody, I think you need more vitamin D, well, I'm also going to explain to them why they need more vitamin D and why maybe they need to do this in their diet or do this in their lifestyle and why I'm recommending this supplement by explaining to them what their body is doing. And I think that's really important in any medical modality because there's this element of gosh, I think, again, I believe in education. I think everybody should understand how their body is working and why and where it's not working so that they can make the decisions that are best for them in order to improve it.
Yeah, I love that too, because when you educate someone, maybe for some practitioners, there's this fear of not being needed anymore. They know it all, but like
Yes,
sometimes that's like the goal, at least in our practice.
absolutely.
It sounds like in yours is like, you know, that you hire us maybe because you love the support and the guidance, and like you already have the information. And if you don't have it, we're going to get it for you.
I always tell my clients if I'm seeing you all the time, I'm not doing my job.
Yeah.
Like I love seeing you. I really like our conversations, but if I'm seeing you all the time, then I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be
Yeah.
doing.
So how do you see your work shift outcomes in pregnancy and childbirth for families?
In so many ways. A part of what we're doing with the functional maternity side, which really, if you hear me say functional maternity, it's this idea of taking the pillars of functional medicine and applying them to maternal physiology. And it's very different than, say, prenatal physiology, too, right? If you hear prenatal care, we're talking about the care of the baby. When I say maternity care, I'm talking about the care of the mother. And my focus is on care of the mother because if mother's healthy, baby's healthy. If baby's healthy, mom may not be healthy because we've just put all of our energy in the baby, but mom actually needed this. When we focus our treatments to supporting the moms, if you look at the research, it says it can't happen. Reversing things like preeclampsia, right? Having latency of early onset preeclampsia and getting somebody to term where they were told they were going to have to deliver their baby early and their baby may not live. These are big things. We also see clients who had severe morning sickness in a previous pregnancy, and we come in and do a bunch of preconception work to set them up for better success, and they have more manageable nausea in the first trimester. People with birth outcomes. I think that's where I dove into this side of medicine the most is I personally had beautiful births. I loved my birth experiences. I came out of that feeling like a goddess, and I wanted every woman I came across to feel that way, right? To not be afraid of it and to come out of that experience being like, oh my God, that was the coolest thing I've ever done. That was awesome. And so many of my friends, my family weren't having that experience. Well, as I dove into the nutrition research surrounding labor physiology, there was so much missing in birth education. And that would be one of the biggest shifts I feel like that I have seen in clinic personally is if we can support the normal physiology in labor preparation and understand how all of these things work, we can reduce our needs for things like inductions. We can help women have more functional birth experiences, which then sets them and their babies and everything up for better success postpartum. But it doesn't start at 36 weeks. We got to start all the way back at 28 weeks. That's when we start preparing for labor. And so it's been this huge shift. And as we talk to our clients through each of these beautiful phases of pregnancy, as it gets to labor and delivery outcome, in clinic, we've seen huge successes with that, with maybe women who had really bad experiences before. And this time they're like, oh my God, it was night and day. So that's something that I get, again, for me, that was one of the driving factors. And when I wrote my first book, Functional Maternity, I joke I wrote the entire book just so I could write chapter 12, which which is my functional childbirth chapter, where
Uh,
we go through some of that labor physiology and how nutrition affects these different physiological changes in mom, who mom's just responding to the signals of baby. And if her body can respond to what baby is saying, things are going to work out the way they're supposed to, right? From a physiological standpoint, obviously there's uncontrollables such as baby positioning and, other things. But for the most part, if we can get her body to do what it's supposed to do in response to baby's signals, that sets her up for much better success in that birth experience.
love it. In your opinion, what are the most overlooked nutritional needs for expecting moms?
I think it depends on what we're talking about in that context. I think that the way we view maternal diet in general is pretty lacking. And I think that, again, each phase of pregnancy has quite different nutritional needs based off the physiology. If we're coming into first trimester, I know, again, modern nutrition is going to tell you all day long, oh, push high protein, protein, protein. But there's a very good reason that moms crave carbohydrates in the first trimester. It's a beautiful physiological reason. And I think we have such a fear around carbohydrates that we kind of neglect that. And that's not saying proteins don't help with nausea or we don't need proteins, but we also have to respect what the body is telling us. And that craving for carbohydrates is an outward indication of those physiological changes. And when we're talking about, say, that one in particular, right? What are some of the biggest food aversions that we see with moms? Like for you, for example, what are some of the biggest food aversions you hear from your clients?
Meat. First.
Meat, right? Absolutely. Absolutely. Like red meat in particular, you say, oh, you should go have some steak or a hamburger, or somebody who's been taking like liver, so
Yeah, or if they
it's
have to
popular
like cook and like cook raw chicken, they're like, oh.
right? And from the physiological standpoint, once you understand what's happening in the maternal body, it all makes sense.
Mhm.
So, one of the biggest triggers of morning sickness is this hormone called GDF-15. Have you seen the studies talk about GDF-15? What GDF-15 is it's a specific growth hormone. It's produced by this placenta, but it plays with mom's brain. Outside of pregnancy, you see this little hormone being produced in cases of toxicity. So it's very common in, say, people who are going through chemotherapy treatment.
Mhm.
They will have this surge of GDF-15 that causes them to what? Get nauseous,
Mhm.
right? In pregnancy, we do see GDF-15 being produced. And moms who don't have maybe a GDF-15 production outside of pregnancy, they're very sensitive to this trigger. But this trigger is telling us to avoid things that could be potentially toxic because our embryo and our placenta are very sensitive to things that are toxic, and our immune system is suppressed at this time because we don't want our immune system to attack our baby. The body says, hey, raw meat, that could have parasites. We probably don't want to eat that. Ooh, those really strong vegetables. Oh, we don't want those either because those have anti-nutrients in it. And that might be irritating for us right now. That could be a problem. We don't want raw vegetables, right? Raw vegetables might be pathogenic carriers. So there's a lot of these things when it comes to, say, other forms of meat. We also find that like iron is toxic in the body. Nobody talks about the toxicity of iron. We talk mostly about iron deficiency and the ramifications of that, especially as we talk about pregnancy. But the body beautifully drops iron absorption right around that like 8 to 10 week mark. So right when nausea kind of hits its peak to like 1 to 2%, because iron is actually quite toxic in the body. And so our body will downregulate that iron absorption. And so when you eat something that is really rich in iron, such as red meat, your body says, absolutely not. I don't want that. That is not what I need right now. But that bagel and cream cheese over there, that sounds good, right? I want that carbs. I want some proteins and fats, but I want them in easy to digest sources. Dairy is a really easy to digest source of carbs, proteins, and fats, especially if it's a whole milk version. And that's where, like, I mean, I say bagels and cream cheese simply because I feel like that is one of the number one things I hear moms say is like, all I want right now is a bagel and cream cheese. And I feel horrible about it because I've been told bagels are so bad for me.
Yeah. They go into pregnancy thinking like, I'm going to do this right. I'm going to
Yes.
like eat my protein, eat my vegetables. That's
Mm-hmm.
the last thing. It was literally just a conversation we were having with the mom yesterday where we're like, you're going to want comfort foods. And our theory was like kind of similar that, foods that are more likely to be contaminant, your body probably rejects it on purpose. And the foods that give you really quick energy sources. When do you
Yeah.
need the most energy? Usually first trimester, where you're just
Yes.
wiped. So I'm glad to hear we haven't been
Yeah.
lying to our moms.
No, no, the placenta cells that are, digging into that endometrial lining, they have to have instant energy. And that instant energy is coming from primarily glucose. And they're using dietary proteins not as energy sources, but for enzymatic function. So they got to make enzymes and stuff too. And so you'll find moms are prone to hypoglycemia in the first trimester. And so it's like, we want all the sugar, but then we're going to suck it down to the placenta. And so it's those big ups and the big downs that are one of the primary triggers of morning sickness on top of things like the GDF-15. And so adding a protein to those carbs, totally, it slows the amount of that glucose coming in the system. It's like rationing it. Okay, here we go. Here we go. We don't want to go too high, but we also have to know that it's going to come in and just go straight down, which is why eating more frequently really helps these moms from a nutritional perspective. There's been really cool studies on nutrition in morning sickness and kind of those nutritional needs. And I know everybody talks about, there was a study done, I forget where it was done, but they found that a higher protein diet was more effective at managing morning sickness. But when you look at the details of the study, their version of a high protein diet was scrambled eggs with a side of fruit and a piece of toast. And they compared this to powdered lemonade.
No.
So I read that and I say, well, a balanced diet with some eggs and they had fruit and carbs. Like there was a piece of toast and there was fruit. So how do you call that? That's not the same thing as we think of, I think, now as a high protein diet.
But if you're just reading the title of the study.
Exactly. You got to get to the details, right?
Yeah.
And there's also studies that talk about communities and societies in which like rice and beans is a big part of their diet actually have less nausea and morning sickness. It's bland. It's easy to digest. It's instant carbs. We have a good balance of nutrients. Thiamine is actually a B vitamin that's found a lot in beans, and people with a lot of morning sickness, so people who fall into that hyperemesis category, are very prone to thiamine deficiency. This is vitamin B1. You can become vitamin B1 deficient after just a couple of days of vomiting. And one of the tricky things is that thiamine deficiency mimics hyperemesis. It causes more severe vomiting. Rice and beans. This is actually a really good source of things like thiamine. So kind of interesting. Like,
yeah.
So when we talk about nutritional needs, I think that's one area that's underrated right there. And then the other area I think that nobody really talks about from a nutritional perspective is third trimester and the preparation for labor and delivery. Again, when it comes to pregnancy-related nutrition, almost everything you read about talks about what does the baby need. Here's what prenatal nutrition, here's what baby needs, here's what baby needs. Baby only needs this many calories, baby only needs this, baby only needs that. Of all the things that are neglected in pregnancy nutrition, it's like everything surrounding mom. That's what we neglect.
Yeah. Can you speak a little bit about protein and iron? Because that is a big thing for families where they're getting their labs tested, they're told they're anemic. I know ferritin, everyone's talking about ferritin right now. It seems like everybody's low. and then hearing you say that like iron can be toxic. Will you speak more to people who are like, I've been told I'm anemic. I have maybe low ferritin or whatever it is. I'm taking either like organ meats or, whatever I'm doing. Speak to that.
Absolutely. So everything with iron in maternity physiology needs to be balanced. It's like the Goldilocks theory is what I call it. Not too hot, not too cold, just right. Iron is a wonderful example of that, where we see study after study that says low levels of iron reserves are associated with pregnancy complications, but so are high iron reserves. The iron physiology is really cool throughout pregnancy, and it's not static. There's like these huge ups and downs that happen at different phases of pregnancy. And we talk a lot about the preconception ferritin stores coming into pregnancy, right? You have to have a good amount of ferritin stores because we know that starting at 12 weeks, ferritin levels are going to drop by 75%. This is actually a normal physiological change. And some researchers are actually saying that this drop is very protective in the third trimester. So there's a little bit of back and forth within the research community because forever it's been, okay, well, anemia, right? Obviously, we don't want women to become anemic, but can this slightly lower ferritin level in the third trimester actually be protective against things such as preeclampsia? Because iron is toxic. I think we forget iron is extremely toxic in the body. It produces a ton of really, really toxic free radicals called hydroxyl groups. Hydroxyl groups are a big part of the regulation of cell lifespan. So on one side, we need hydroxyl groups because those are going to help kill off cells that are dysfunctional. Their life expectancy is over, cancer cells, those sorts of things. On the flip side, though, if we have too many hydroxyl groups, we're going to use up our antioxidants and we're going to cause premature cell death, inflammation, oxidative stress, those sorts of things. When we're looking at anemia, like if somebody is anemic, well, yes, that is a time and a place to be putting in some iron supplements. If that ferritin has dropped too low, yes, we need to be giving them some iron supplements. But if somebody's iron levels in their reserves are at a pretty adequate to high level, some studies show that iron supplementation, when we do not need it, may increase the risk of these oxidative stress-like conditions, such as preeclampsia. So again, really interesting stuff, big balancing act that has to be done. I just actually posted a bunch of this on my social media page actually this week. So iron is it's fresh in my brain. So as for moving through pregnancy, again, we have this huge drop in iron absorption that happens at the tail end of the first trimester. And by 12 weeks, it should kind of go back to what preconception iron absorption levels were, because now we have to recover from that big drop. We should have had a good reserve of ferritin coming in. And what ferritin is our reserve iron. Our body makes ferritin as a way to sequester iron and to protect us from the toxicity of iron. So it holds ferritin in, or it holds iron in, and then goes, okay, here you go, cell. Here's some iron as you need it, because we don't want to give you too much, because that could be bad. So we have to have a good reserve of iron coming into the first trimester, knowing that iron absorption is going to drop. Now, usually we don't see a huge drop in ferritin through the first trimester simply because we also have the cessation of the menstrual cycle. So we're not losing our iron that way. There's only a handful of ways that you can lose iron in the body. It accumulates and stores pretty well. For women, the most common way you lose iron is through bleeding, right? Through our menstrual cycles. The other way we lose iron is through sweating. And then the other way we lose iron is through cell death, cell shedding. So that could be skin cells, hair cells, gut cells. We're kind of losing those on a regular basis too. So then we get to 12 weeks. We have our wonderful baseline. We find studies that show that women who have a ferritin level greater than, I think it's like 64 point something, 64.6 or something like that, have a higher risk of preeclampsia. But if we have somebody who has a ferritin level less than 30, we can almost predict that they're going to be anemic in the third trimester. So it's like we have this little gap, that's the Goldilocks gap, right? And I'll even say some studies that show that 40 and below, we can almost say, ooh, that's going to drop like 75%. So we know that that's going to go pretty low. We may end up with some iron deficiency without anemia type things. So this is kind of like our magic window based off of what we see in the studies. From 12 weeks to 28 weeks, we expect to see a 50% drop in ferritin. Most of that ferritin is getting broken down to go into the 35% increase in red blood cells that has to happen in the second trimester. That usually happens right around the 20 to 24 week mark. We get to that point, we have actually a normal anemic phase that happens right around 20 weeks. And it's because we have the blood volume has increased. So the plasma component, the liquid component of our blood expands, but the red blood cells don't quite keep. So there's a moment where our body's like, oh no, we forgot to make red blood cells, right? And we get a little bit of hypoxia, and then the body kicks in with erythropoietin, which triggers more red blood cell development, but it's always a little lower than it was preconception. And that's what you expect, right? We expect those hemoglobin levels to be on our lower end of the reference range. And that's considered a little bit more protective and a little bit more normal for pregnancy based off that physiology. Then once we get past that phase, the body shifts into transferring more iron to our baby so our baby can store iron for the fourth trimester. So for postpartum, when they can't really absorb iron from breast milk or formula, they have to have a beautiful iron reserve. And we find in the studies that diet alone does not give our babies what they need. So not only are we pulling iron in from the diet, but we're also breaking down mom's ferritin again to give baby what they need. And they need about 350 milligrams of iron before delivery. So I think it's like 8 to 9 milligrams per day is what they're taking from mom in the third trimester. Now, the other interesting thing we see with iron absorption as we roll into the third trimester is we see differences in the absorption of the different forms of iron. So we have the two primary forms of iron that we talk about, right? Heme and non-heme iron. I'm sure everybody's heard those two things, right? Heme and non-heme iron. Heme iron is our animal-based iron. Non-heme iron is more elemental iron that we're going to find in plants. Heme iron is made in the mitochondrial the cells. It goes into not only making hemoglobin and myoglobin. Myoglobin is like hemoglobin's cousin that lives in the muscles and it stores iron in the muscles, but it also goes into making different enzymes in the body. So this goes into making things like the TPO enzyme in the thyroid. It goes into making antioxidants like catalase. There's a whole list of P450 enzymes, which are cytochrome P450 enzymes play into phase 1 detox. They play into how you make your hormones, whether it's estrogen, progesterone, cortisol, aldosterone. We have to have iron in the heme form in order for that to happen. So
There's
eating
that
muscle
like
meat,
whole body thing where it's like
oh
not
my gosh, right? Exactly.
how it
This is what
affects
makes
everything. Yeah.
functional medicine so cool. Is we're not just saying low hemoglobin equals iron, because that's definitely not true either. You can have low hemoglobin due to B6 deficiencies and B12 deficiencies and copper deficiencies, so many other things. But if you have so that's the heme iron comes into the diet, right? Non-heme iron is going to be our plant-based iron. As we roll into third trimester, we find that heme-based iron absorption pretty much stays the same throughout pregnancy. We don't see a huge uptick in your ability to absorb heme iron, but we see this massive increase in your ability to absorb non-heme iron. So outside of pregnancy, non-heme iron absorption is 2 to 15%. But as we roll through pregnancy, we just watch it go, oh my gosh, look at all this absorption. By the time it peaks at 34 weeks, non-heme iron absorption is close to 60 to 70%. Heme iron absorption ranges from 35 to 45%. So in the third trimester, our non-heme iron actually absorbs more effectively than our heme iron. What gets interesting about the heme iron is, as I've seen a couple of studies, and you'll see these studies based around placental function, is that heme iron seems to be absorbed almost whole and transferred directly to the baby, where the non-heme iron goes through all the normal metabolic transfer, breakdown, storage, usages that we would normally see. So non-heme iron goes into all the functions, goes up to helping maybe mom's ferritin levels, and the heme iron goes straight to baby. And it's not until baby gets that 350 milligrams of iron that we start to see the placenta go, oh, that's too much. Well, we're full down here. Let's go push that back up to mom and she can store that. We start to see that close to 36 weeks. Then we typically see those ferritin levels increase again. But between 28 and 36 weeks, there's another approximate 25% drop in ferritin levels because of that usage. Then from 36 to 40 weeks, the body goes, now we get to store that iron again and prepare for blood loss of childbirth and the recovery in that postpartum phase. And baby should have the iron it needs to get through those 3 months postpartum, right? So as we look at the nutritional side of iron, these are cool dynamics that nobody talks about, that really changes not just the nutritional needs that somebody needs for iron, but the treatment strategies for midwives such as yourself when we're treating things like iron deficiency with anemia, or in the cases where we have anemia but our ferritin levels actually aren't that bad, then we have to start thinking, what are the other contributing factors? The other thing is that if these ferritin levels are getting too high in that third trimester, again, we're going to start seeing these increased risks of things like preeclampsia. Now, when we're looking at ferritin, and we talk about this connection between ferritin in the third trimester and preeclampsia, because I know I scare everybody when I say that. They're like, wait, no, my ferritin was here and I was taking an iron supplement and oh my God, did I do this? Oftentimes, the elevated ferritin levels that we are seeing associated with preeclampsia are reactions to inflammation in the body versus iron intake in the body. Now, if somebody has elevated ferritin and they have signs of inflammation, it's probably best not to take an iron supplement, even if they're anemic, because all you're going to do is continue to increase that inflammation and they're just going to store it as ferritin versus using it where we want them to use it, because it's the body's protection mechanism. It's the body saying, hold up, we got to fix this cellular inflammation we have here. So we're going to take all that iron and we're just going to store it in ferritin. Oh, you're going to give us more. I'm just going to keep putting that right here. I'm just going to keep carrying it and it's just stacking up. So it's a sign of the oxidative stress and the inflammation. Now, again, can iron cause more of that? Sure, right? So it's an interesting game. And again, the goal of functional medicine isn't just this equals this. It's, well, I see this, and I see this. So what's happening in this individual and what does this actually mean for this person?
So there's lots of parents that listen to this, but there's also practitioners. And for the practitioners listening, when is the best time in pregnancy to draw labs if you're going to, so that you see the
Yeah,
drops and you see the rises if somebody is wanting that reassurance and they don't see a drop and think that it's not supposed to be there. Yeah. When do you
sure.
recommend drawing labs?
Yeah, so my standard of care is I always run ferritin at 12 weeks. And I run a lot of different things at 12 weeks, way more than just the classic OB panel. I like to get a baseline at 12 weeks of even things like the comprehensive metabolic panel. I want to know what somebody's liver enzymes look like from the get-go. Because if they have a slight rise out of their normal, but it's within the normal reference ranges, that's already showing an element of something at right. The liver and kidneys is working a little harder than maybe they should. We're seeing some tissue damage and some release of the ALT and AST into the bloodstream. Or maybe their baseline's here. And so when we test it later, we're like, are those elevated? We don't know if those are elevated, but they're on the higher end of the reference range. But that was their baseline,
Right.
right? So it's good to get, I think, that information. Vitamin D, I think first trimester is a wonderful time and probably the optimal time to run vitamin D because as far as preeclampsia goes, there's a ton of research that connects low vitamin D in the first trimester and the first half of pregnancy with higher rates of preeclampsia later, like late onset preeclampsia. And if we can give them a vitamin D supplement in the before 20 weeks, we see it improving those risk outcomes. But if we wait until after 20 weeks, like we caught it later, we don't see benefit. So if we can catch it early, then we can treat it and get it under control before it becomes an issue. I'll oftentimes test B12 at that point too, kind of the same thing. I don't want to have somebody getting too far into pregnancy if we have an element of a deficiency. But yes, we're doing a ferritin at that point. We're also doing an iron and TIBC with a transferrin saturation. That's the whole pretty picture. I usually test thyroid at that point too. Same thing. Thyroid gets pretty hammered. I think thyroid physiology in pregnancy is one of those really cool, kind of like the iron side. Like I love it. I'm passionate about thyroid health in pregnancy because that thyroid just gets hammered. And have you seen the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding?
Yeah.
Yeah. Half the time I feel like I'm Costas. Like, give me a word, any word, and I can tell you how the root of that word is Greek, right? I feel the same way about thyroid. Give me a condition, any condition, and I can tell you how the root of that condition is thyroid. Doesn't mean everything is thyroid. It means thyroid can cause almost every one of these conditions that we see in pregnancy, including longer labors. So I think it's one of those really important, easy tests that give you so much information. So I tend to run all of that at like 12 weeks.
And when you say
Now,
thyroid, just to clarify,
mhm,
some people just think TSH.
TSH.
You're
Yeah.
talking about like a whole panel or just TSH?
If I've never run a whole panel on them before, I absolutely want a whole panel. If I know them preconception and I know what their normal
Yeah.
pattern looks like, I might pick a couple of values based off of that individual that I then run. Maybe it's a TSH and a total T4. Now, we have so many organizations, the Endocrine Society, even ACOG at once said that running a total T4 is more accurate than measuring a free T4. And it's because we see that in pregnancy, there's like a 1.5-fold increase in thyroid hormone production, but most of those thyroid hormones are bound to transport proteins. So we won't measure it in a free. And kind of like the ferritin holding all that iron and rationing it, that's what the transport proteins are like, oh my God, that was so much thyroid hormone. We have got to neutralize that or this person's going to feel horrible, right? And it says, oh, here we go. We're just gonna keep those free T4 levels right on par, but we're gonna have so much built up on those transport proteins,
Ration it.
right? We're gonna ration it. We're gonna make sure that the free T4 stays here, even though the total is here. Total T4 tends to be a little bit more accurate in telling us how much thyroid hormone is in there. And we have conditions like, hypothyroxidemia, which really just means low T4. And you can have hypothyroxemia with a normal TSH, and it's still associated with negative outcomes in pregnancy. So yes, it's a bigger panel than just TSH and free T4. So that's what I'll run. If I have somebody, again, that I've never done thyroid labs on, I might even get a baseline on their thyroid antibodies at that point. For a lot of women, pregnancy is the trigger for thyroid conditions such as Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune-based thyroid disease, because again, the thyroid is going to get hammered in pregnancy. And with that extra stimulation comes increased pollution in the thyroid, which can trigger the immune system to go, ooh, there's some inflammation there. We should go check that out. And then it starts to attack parts of the thyroid just inadvertently through autoimmune disease. So postpartum is a very common time for people to be diagnosed with things like Hashimoto's. So that would be that. panel. And again, depending on what we see there, I might then test it again later. Like if somebody was a borderline on a ferritin, I might test it again at 24 weeks or even 20 weeks, dependent on what's happening there. I'm definitely going to test it all again at 28 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's, again, it's one of our big shifting moments. 12 weeks, 28 weeks, these are huge moments and shifts in the maternal physiology. And I want to know, how did she come out of second trimester? And what do I need to do to support her as she goes into third trimester, knowing what I know about the physiology? And then we test again at 36 weeks. That's our next big transition. Okay, 36 weeks. How did third trimester treat her? And what do I need to do to prepare her for labor and delivery? So those are my big moments in which I do kind of bigger panels. I might be doing smaller panels at different times in pregnancy, again, based off of the symptoms, based off of what I saw in a previous lab. So I don't do protocols. Like, that's just not my thing, because I think protocols, they miss things. Right. And my goal is to, again, give the individual the best care they can and the most comprehensive and individualized care.
Love it. Can you speak a little bit to the future that you're envisioning?
My future for practitioners is what my goal is to share all of this knowledge so that other practitioners can basically think critically and understand the physiological changes so that they can do this work, right? So that they can help more women have better birth outcomes. I mean, you're aware our preeclampsia stats right now are not looking good. Our maternity care stats aren't doing so hot, right? We're seeing increasing rates of diagnosis for preeclampsia, severe preeclampsia, these sorts of conditions. Now, conventional medicine, yeah, I mean, you'll see we've created wonderful strategies for medical management and treatment of these conditions, but we're seeing them at higher rates. And to me, that's the problem, right? And if I can get more providers, such as yourself, the midwives, even the physicians, I've got a bunch of physicians that I consult with, to be able to get the time to look at their clients. And I think home birth midwives are a prime position for this, because you guys have the time to do this. I think our goals are the same. How do we prevent them from having complications so they can stay home and they can get that goal? That's a functional childbirth experience. That's the goal. That if we can look at this from that perspective of, this is the normal physiology, this is your variation of norm, and this is kind of how we can support you from that nutritional perspective to improve those birth outcomes. I think in the long run, in the future, we're going to start seeing that statistic go backwards and get back to maybe where it was decades ago.
How does collaboration with practitioners work with you? Do families usually work with you individually and share their results with their practitioners?
Yeah, that's normally how we work, is the patients themselves play middleman between all of us. I have found over the years, I have a couple of, like, say, midwives and physicians that we have a pretty good rapport and we do communicate with each other on our patients. But with the amount of people that I see in various states and around the country, it's really hard to be able to communicate fully with their physicians or with their midwives. And then sometimes those providers don't care. So we work as more of an adjunct provider, and that we're definitely not their primaries, right? We're not delivering babies or anything like that. We're supplemental care. We're filling in the gaps of their conventional care.
And what do you find like is the biggest barrier for families? Because like to me, it's like no brainer, like everyone should work with you. But what's the biggest barrier that stops families from looking for this kind of support? And also, like, if families ever feel overwhelmed by like all the like different health philosophies and like what to choose.
I would say the biggest barriers that I have seen is, I think the first one is not even knowing it's an option. The number one barrier is the education, is knowing what is available, whether it's in your community or nationally, or knowing it's even an option. I just actually spoke at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and the entire conference was about bridging the gap between all of the different options that expectant couples have in their support, whether it is something like this or if it's pelvic physical therapy and lactation consulting and all these things that you talk to some of these women, they're like, I didn't even know that was a thing. Nobody even told me about this.
Yeah.
That's why I think I like to jump on these podcasts. Is it's, even if they're not seeing me, man, if they can get with somebody who offers this support in their community and then share the knowledge, like, hey, this is an option. This may benefit you. Like, again, that's hurdle number one. The second hurdle is finance. And I would say that is probably one of the biggest barriers. So maybe people know it's an option, but man, they look at the price point of functional medicine and they're like, I can't afford that, right? And I know personally providers who do functional medicine. And it's one of my qualms with functional medicine and where it's gone is I think there's providers out there who are taking advantage of people's desires to look for this and turning it into a financial business model versus what it should be, and that is helping our clients. So they do these big, expensive, multi-thousand-dollar packages, and you have to commit to working with them for a solid year. And if you don't show up, then you're still going to owe them. And it's, I mean, I've seen some of these packages be upwards of like 10 grand. Like that's not feasible for the average person. I've also seen, some of these intakes being the same way where, you get an intake with them, it's a 30-minute, and then they want to do all the labs and stuff and then follow up with you later, and you're paying for all of this leg time. And so, I mean, for me, I designed my practice with the idea of trying to give patients the most I can, the biggest bang for their buck. So I try to keep my intake prices low. We charge based off of services rendered. I try to give clients recommendations for lab work before we even come in to the intake appointment so that we have all of the material in place. So with that first appointment, we're already making change versus here's my consultation with you, but then here's my report of findings 3 weeks later, right? Or a month later, or whatever it happens to be. At my clinic, I offer free 15-minute phone calls for people who are considering being new patients. And these are free calls. So they can just call and say, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. Is this something you think you can help with? And I can explain to them a little bit. I can't give them medical advice in these things legally, but I use that as my base of like, here's what I think could be going on. Here's where I would start. And if you want to see me, here's all of the lab work I would do for you leading up to our intake appointment, right?
So they already have a plan in place. Yeah.
I already have a plan in place. So again, we are making the most of their appointment time. So, and I get the finance part gets to be a little rough. Most functional medicine providers aren't accepting insurance because insurance doesn't really cover what we do yet. Maybe someday, right? But now it's not. So I think that becomes a big barrier for a lot of people because it is a little bit of a price point to get started.
I feel like home birth midwives can relate to that. It's like we try to keep the price manageable. And if insurance covered it, we would charge a whole lot more because of what we offer.
Well,
and
exactly.
It's not realistic for families. Yeah.
Exactly. And that is the catch-22. If insurance gets involved, then they're telling you what you can and cannot do, how much time you can spend with a client, what you can do, all the things that insurance does. I mean, at our office, an average intake appointment is anywhere from an hour to 2 hours long. So to be able to give somebody that amount of time to really listen to their story and to really be able to dive into all of the aspects of their physiology and their care, that's our luxury, right? Is to be able to have that time.
Yeah.
So
a couple questions that I've jotted down throughout this is I'm curious your thoughts on like teas and herbal infusions, like if those are part of recommendations sometimes in terms of like postpartum recovery, like favorite meal snack kind of go-tos, other books you might recommend other than your own, obviously. Yeah. Could you speak to any of those?
All of the above. So herbs, yes, have a place, right? Just like supplements have a place and diet has a place. It has a place based off the individual. And these things, herbs are medicine. Part of my degree is in herbal medicine. Herbs are medicinal and herbs do not come without risk. I think we forget that. So any herbal recommendation should be done with caution. I'm not a big willy-nilly, like, just take the herbs, they're fine. Like
some plants can kill you.
The plants can kill you. Exactly. And it may have, herbs are great, but they may not be great for you. It's like ashwagandha, for example. Ashwagandha is a great adaptogenic herb if it fits your pattern. If it doesn't fit your pattern, it might make you feel pretty bad. The same thing with Vitex. Vitex is another really great herb for the right scenario. And I've seen people actually cause anovulation because they took Vitex and they actually didn't need it. So they actually ruined their fertility for a couple of cycles.
I've had some friends who became suicidal, like suicidal thoughts after Vitex. Yeah.
So herbs do not come without risk. And I highly recommend that anybody who's looking to do herbal treatment, it's really good to consult with somebody who understands the herbs and the pharmacology aspects of those herbs and how those herbs really do play into, again, pregnancy as well. I've absolutely seen people come into my clinic. I'm like, you're taking what? we should stop that now. Like, who told you to take that? Oh, I read about this. Right. So, and it's not like we're like, okay, you caused birth defects, but we also say, that's okay because of this, that, and the other, depending on the herb. So yes, herbs have a place, but it should be controlled and structured. And I think the same goes for most nutritional supplements as well. I think we think, oh, it's natural, it's a vitamin and mineral, it's safe. But man, I tell you what, I've seen more people overdosing on nutritional supplements in the last handful of years than I do deficiencies, because we have such easy access to these really good supplements now. And we read, oh, this is good for this, or this is good for this. Folate's one of those. Oh, I should have extra folates, and this is great for pregnancy. And you get in and you're looking at not just their blood levels, but their functional values. And you're like, man, you're taking too much. We gotta cut this back. Like, this can be harmful. This explains some of your additional symptoms, whatever it happens to
It's
be. It's
not
kind
the
of like the
more
iron.
the merrier.
Exactly. Especially as we start with modern nutrition science, being able to make the vitamin complexes that bypass rate limiting steps and bypass and go into like the functional nutritional forms of a lot of these vitamins. With great power comes great responsibility. And I think that's where providers need to take accountability too, is because if we have the ability to use these amazing nutritional supplements, which are great for people who need them, we also need to understand we also have that power to harm with them as well. It's just like a pharmaceutical, but with a really cool vitamin in front of the label in front of it. So yes, that's kind of my blurb on herbs and supplements there too. I'm sorry, what were your other questions? Like, what was the postpartum?
Postpartum, like go-to meal snacks, because we're like really
Oh,
heavily focused on nutrition postpartum.
yes. So postpartum is a time of recovery. And I always try to tell my clients, pretend you've just been sick. What would you eat if you were sick? Right? Would that be when you sit down to a big salad? Probably not. That's really hard on your stomach. That takes a lot of energy to break down and digest. And we need your energy to go down to healing your tissue damage. So we tend to lean towards foods that are, number one, easy to digest. That's a lot of soups and stews and congees and cooked vegetables and those sorts of things. We also want our mamas to have a lot of antioxidants, because labor and delivery, pregnancy, really, really high in that oxidative stress. And we need these antioxidants to help our body clean up and detox from all of that toxicity of pregnancy. So fresh fruit absolutely falls into this category, right? We need those good vitamin C based foods. We need some extra vitamin D. So we look at things like fish. Fish is a good one, right? Anything that's going to have a lot of these nutrients that go into recovery, but are also easy to digest. So some of my go-to foods and meals would be something like congee. I think congee is a fantastic postpartum base. And for those who don't know what congee is like a Chinese rice porridge or an Asian rice porridge. And you can make it savory, you can make it sweet. One of my favorite variations is what's called 8 treasure congee. And 8 treasure congee has a combination of different grains. It's not just rice-based. It's got nuts and seeds in it. It's got some cashews and some peanuts. I think it's got some other like legumes in there too. I think you can put some azuki beans in there. So it's just kind of like this mush of nuts and seeds, legumes, rice, grains, like all of that in a very easy to digest, soupy, porridgey thing. Makes a really nice breakfast. You put some honey on there. I think the traditional recipe uses jujubes, which are the Asian style dates that are less sweet than, say, like a medjool date. But that's a really easy thing to eat. In Korean culture, we do a soup called Korean birthday soup, and it is a postpartum soup, but then you also feed it to your children on their birthdays.
Oh,
It kind of reminds them of what you went through as a mother. Like, here, have the soup, right? But it is like a bone broth seaweed based soup. When I make it at home, I use beef and I use tofu and I will put miso in there. But it's a really good base. We eat it actually just in the winter too, because I feel it like it's such a good soup. And the seaweed in and of itself really helps with, say, the thyroid recovery. So there's that aspect. Again, the 4th trimester is all about recover, recover, recover. Whether that recovery is tissue damage recovery, whether that recovery is inflammation-based recovery, all of that, right? So again, easy to digest foods, soups and stews in general are fantastic. I'm not a smoothie fan postpartum. I think that that's really hard on the tummy to digest, especially if it's a lot of cold stuff. It just takes your energy into digesting that food versus going where we want it to be, which is out into the system doing healing.
I didn't ask this question, but would those also be your recommendations for in labor, or would it be different?
In labor is a little different because it kind of like first trimester, we need some quick energy, right? You're burning through a lot of calories here. So we need to make sure that we have instant energy sources that are easy to digest. I mean, honey sticks are kind of one of those really easy sources. We always talk about, I think eating in labor is a really good thing. Also feel that from doing certain things myself, both my kiddos, natural births, didn't have any complications, no meds. I akin labor and delivery to this experience that I had forever ago now, it was almost a decade ago. My mom and I hiked the Grand Canyon Rim to Rim Trail. Have you heard of that trail? It's
Yep,
kind of
yep.
like a marathon hiking trail. Crazy people like to run it and go rim to rim to rim. And they passed us. And I was like, it's for you guys. I'm not that person. I'm lucky I'm doing the rim to rim here. But after I did this hike, I remember thinking that the entire experience was like giving birth. And I mean, I could definitely, it takes me like 30 minutes to go through my whole analogy because I use it for patients all the time to explain like all the phases of labor because I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
it really resonates from a physical perspective and an emotional perspective. And when it comes to preparing for such a big event, if you're going to do a big marathon or if you're going to do a big activity that requires you to burn a lot of energy over a short period of time, you do not train until the bitter end, right? You take a couple weeks off and you do a little carb loading, right? You got to get some calories into those cells and stored because when you go and do that big event, from personal experience, the last thing you want to do is eat anything because you'll see this actually, it's really cool. You see this in studies mostly on people who actually do marathon running. But when you are in a high intensity exercise or childbirth, for example, your body takes all of its energy, pulls it away from the gut and into the muscles. And so you actually see atrophy of the villi of the gut, right? They suck themselves in. And so they're not absorbing, you're not digesting during this event. And you will find if you do one of these events, if you've ever done this, you don't want to eat. You have to almost force yourself to eat something or even drink water. I remember being on the upward side of the rim to rim. And this is like, I always joke, this is like being in true active labor, hitting transition. And like, that's like my active labor phase. But I remember, the whole rest of the Grand Canyon, we're talking, we're laughing. I mean, on the downhill, we were even running, trying to make up time. And I always say that's, when moms are like, oh, the contractions are starting. I'm going to go do curb walking and I'm going to do all these things. And I'm like, just slow it down. Don't wear yourself out now.
Yeah,
You've got a
yeah.
long journey ahead of you, right? The flats of the Grand Canyon, I always joke that's like the 5-1-1 pattern. It's just one foot in front of the other. Nothing's too intense. You're still having conversations. You're stopping for your peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Like you're eating food, right? You're having those conversations. The uphill is when things get fun. And you've already done 14 miles at that point. You're already kind of tired. And now we're asking you to do the hardest part of all the work. That's when everybody starts separating and going at their own pace. It's where everybody puts their headphones in and puts their meditation music on. It's where all the conversations stop, right? And you are just right here inside in this deep hole of looking down, taking 10 steps, looking up and going, I've gone nowhere. Am I even going anywhere? Or am I making any progress? Right? That whole game. And I remember I had like the Gatorade Goos and I had all of these things for that instant energy in that phase. And at one point I ate one of those things and I was like, I think I'm going to throw up because at that phase of pushing your body, you literally have no ability to absorb. And so you almost have to have something liquid and instant sugar if you even want to get it into the cells at that point. So it becomes trying to maintain hydration with those little sips of things, but it's that carb load before and the hydration before that ends up being your best friend. And so in those early phases, you still have to be a little careful because if you haven't digested it by the time you go into active labor, a strong possibility you're just going to throw it all up anyways. But even within those early active labor phases, some of the things that I will have my clients do is a lot of these like instant quick energy sources, easy to digest. That might be a good place for a smoothie, actually, right? In the early labor stuff, where you're getting just quick fruit in the system, juice, something along those lines. I've had patients, I've been to some births before where, man, God love their family. They had the most beautiful spreads of food in there and like nobody touched it,
Yeah.
right? Because it's there for sure. And I say
Like
that. So
that's for the birth team, not
exactly not.
that's for the partner. And yeah.
Although I have one of my favorite clients of all time. I was at her birth And I like got there and she pushed that baby out in like 30 minutes. But I'm like talking to her husband and her, and she was like, yeah, I just had like a burrito like 30 minutes ago. And I'm like, oh, cool. So we're like still a little early in the game. This is great. And then immediately she's like, I feel a lot of pressure. And sure enough, there she was. She was crowning and there was a baby. I was like, I did not see that coming.
Well, that's birth for you, right? As soon as you
Yeah,
think you know how it's going to go, it's like, no.
exactly. Exactly. So everybody's different.
Yes. Yeah.
But if you're looking at that physiology and you're looking at how that typically progresses, and if you've ever been in one of those scenarios,
Mhm.
it becomes like, what is the quickest energy I can get? Bone broth is wonderful, probably not going to help so much in labor. Might get some of the electrolytes and the hydration component, but it becomes, if you're going to do anything, get some sugars and fluids.
Love it. Well, I know that's our time. I do want you to share like how people can be in contact with you and all your resources. Are there any other resources other than your own that are like your go-tos that you want families to know about, whether it's books or anything?
So, oh gosh, there's so many good resources I feel like out there from different perspectives. There are a handful of, like, if we're talking about like postpartum nutrition books, I've got a handful of those that I really like recommending to people. One is like the first 40 days. I think that one's a pretty popular one now. That's a really good one from the fertility perspective, and it's some of the other dietary stuff. Lily Nichols books. Those are always good ones too, where she's got the real food for pregnancy, real food for gestational diabetes, and then I think her new one is the real food for fertility. Her books are awesome. I think they're a good base for people for all, again, understanding that nutrition physiology and what works, what doesn't work and stuff. As far as people who want to connect with me, I am mostly on Instagram, so that's at functional.maternity. Like I said, I post mostly research-based, evidence-based research on nutrition, whether it's individual nutrients or nutrition in general on pregnancy and pregnancy complications. I have my website, which is functionalmaternity.com. This is more for providers. I do offer accredited continuing education courses for providers so they can see what's available, what's coming up there. And then you can access the clinic through that same website. So it's the functionalmaternity.com. There'll be a little button that says Functional Maternity Clinic, and that'll take you to the clinic. So if there's anybody who is interested in setting up a free call just to see what we do, by all means, let us know.
Well, thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe. If you'd like to follow along, you can find us on Instagram at Born Wild Podcast and Facebook. You can go to our website at www.bornwildmidwifery.com. See you later.